Today in this session, brought to you by Neuritas, we're going to discuss the role that muscle plays in our overall metabolic health and how this can impact our lifespan over the long term. So our speaker is Dr. Andy Franklin Miller. He is the Chief Medical and Innovation Officer for Neuritas, in which he has a broad list of responsibilities. He is also a double board certified physician with a PhD in biomechanics, and he's a specialist in sports medicine. Then he also served for 16 years in the Royal Navy, and let me tell you, he looks way too young to have done all that, so I'm really interested to hear how he does it. So I think he's got a fair amount to tell us about this, so welcome.
Thank you for the intro. I'd love to say it was all longevity, but it's not. I'm going to take you on a little journey, and I'm going to try to convince you that muscle health is probably the one real biohack that we have in terms of longevity right now that actually has some decent science behind it. I'm sure we'll have heard David Sinclair say, longevity is not about living longer, it's about living better, and therefore coined that phrase health span. And that's important because when we start to think about the control we have over our health, Jay from Illinois, Chicago, said very clearly the only control we have over the duration of our lives is to shorten it, and we do a pretty good job about doing it. We make lots of choices. We make choices that are poor in terms of exercise, in terms of dietary choices, in terms of lifestyle choices, and we're really good at reducing it. What we're not very good at doing is trying to improve our health along the way. And are we actually living longer? Well, this is interesting. It's a study that looks at the top 23 OECD countries. And if you look at the bars on the right-hand side, it doesn't project brilliantly on these TV screens. But actually, we're not living longer. Gradually, the transition over the last 10 years has started to peter out. So actually, we're broadly living the same length in OECD countries. So we're not living longer. So the perception is that actually we've reached a point, which is an inflection point, that things can actually transform. But when we talk about longevity, and we talk about what it means, and we talk about muscle health, there is very poor definitions of what exactly we mean. This comes from the Copenhagen Sarcopenia study and describes it as low lean muscle mass, muscle strength, and physical function are risk factors for disability, frailty, and life expectancy. So it's the first sort of hint that actually muscle mass here might be quite important in defining what we do about our health. And can we look at it in a different way? Well, we can look at it from an epigenetic point of view. So we can see, from a DNA methylation point of view, biomarkers in aging and can be related to muscle mass. We look at the Horvath clock, a mechanism here where it's been pretty well researched in terms of the difference between a biological age, i.e. how our tissues reflect our age, and chronological age, actually how old we are, how many years we've had on the clock. And so there's a hint here that muscle may be able to reverse some of that from a biological age perspective. How can we measure it? Well, actually, there's a lovely paper here looking at grip strength. This year, published in Journal of Cachexia, looks at the relationship between biological and chronological age, but reflected with grip strength. Now, there's a bias in these studies because obviously grip strength is a great, easy tool to use in terms of aging, active aging, sarcopenic studies, whereby it's easy to do, it's relatively reliable. But there is a significant association you can see here with grip strength, reflecting muscle strength, reflecting biological age. But what can we do to reflect upon it? So the British Medical Journal pushed out over 30 years ago a strategy to reduce cardiovascular disease by 80%, and it was the poly pill. A bunch of medication, a bunch of pharma products in one pill that everybody would take once a day and have a significant reduction in all-cause mortality. The problem with that is people don't take pills. You can see here, a third of patients don't take the medication they're prescribed 3 months after having a heart attack. And 50% of prescriptions are never filed at all. So you go to see a physician, the physician writes a wonderful prescription, it's a great pharma model, and you don't take it. So would the poly pill really actually have an effect if we're relying on it? Well, actually, it's got a pretty big effect in terms of longevity, 11% on all-cause mortality, mainly cardiovascular and metabolic health. So if we did take it, there's a suggestion we would do better from it. So we would live longer. But what about exercise? The World Health Organization tells us we should take lots of steps. 10,000 steps a day shows a 23% decrease in all-cause mortality. So a great stat. Now that's a slightly skewed, it's a meta-analysis, 15 different international studies. When you look at the differentiation there, 10,000 steps can be 5% through to 23%. So I picked the headline figure to tease you that 10,000 was such a great deal. But what about muscle mass? So remember, polypill, 10%, muscle mass, 17% decrease in all-cause mortality. Again, meta-analysis data, significant pool data. There's some variation from about 12 but up to 30, so I picked the mean here. So 17% decrease in all-cause mortality beats the polypill. And muscle strength, rather than muscle mass, 10% decrease. So there's a differentiation between muscle mass and muscle strength. We'll talk about the nuances there in a second, but has a significant effect on all-cause mortality. So in terms of health span, muscle mass works better than a pill. This guy, some of you may know. If you're British, you definitely know him. Sir David Brailsford was the manager for Team Sky, cycling team, tainted somewhat slightly in the same era as all cycling teams, but had this lovely concept in terms of the aggregation of marginal gains. If we can find things that make a 2% or a 3% change, and we can add them together, we come up with a bigger sum of its mass. So muscle mass alone is never going to be the one thing that might make a difference in terms of longevity, but it certainly makes a difference. And what do we mean in terms of muscle strength reducing all-cause mortality? It reduces cardiovascular disease, neurocognitive and neurodegenerative illness, total cancer, and diabetes. So these are real studies, real reduction in all-cause mortality, but in specific areas, cardiovascular, metabolic, neurocognition, total cancer. Huge impact. Just so that I'm not singing all the praises, is there an optimum balance? Well, there is. Meta-analyses here say that actually you can see the biggest relative risk reduction between 40 minutes a week and 140 minutes a week. So there is an optimum amount in terms of strength training one can do. Not entirely sure why the answer in terms of above 140 minutes, but 140 minutes. So there's some pretty good evidence around in terms of muscle protein intake. There are lots of variables in terms of we need, in order to create an optimum condition for muscle gain, we need to have high training load, we need to ensure sufficient protein, and there are some other variables in terms of, there's some good evidence between leucine, 3 grams per meal. There is some good evidence for casein late at night in terms of that protein balance, but we need protein in order to be able to synthesize muscle. We can't do it without. And that number varies. If you're a training athlete, it can be as high as 2 grams per kilogram of body weight in terms of protein in divided doses, or it can be as low as 1.3 grams per kilogram of per protein in a day-to-day evidence. So at Neuritas, what we do is we create peptides. We found peptides from nature. So those peptides, we use our AI platform. We've taken well over 200 plant sources to identify 6 million peptides from plants. And what we can do with those is marry them after doing 200 million biological experiments to a specific function. So peptides from plants that are absorbed in the gut, that will survive, that can act via specific mechanisms. PeptiStrong was our first ingredient. It's a bunch of peptides that act on muscle, hence why the longevity in muscle talk. And we know they work via specific mechanisms of action in the muscle, and we know they survive the gut because the biological experimentation has confirmed that. And within the muscle cell itself, in terms of when it's damaged, we know that satellite cells trigger an upregulation of the mTOR pathway. And that mTOR pathway is how PeptiStrong, the first batch of peptides here, starts to work. It upregulates the S6 pathway in terms of increasing the amount of protein synthesis in the muscle cell. It has 3 other mechanisms of action via different peptides within that network. And I'm speaking faster than the slide, so I'll pause briefly, because you can see with the mTOR pathway, typically leucine and arginine work at a stage before PeptiStrong. Leucine binds to cestrin-2, arginine to castor, upregulates that mTOR pathway, and we get that S6 phosphorylation upregulation. And that's where PeptiStrong starts to work, around that S6 pathway, to increase that upregulated protein synthesis. And I'll show you some results from a clinical study there showing that it's 4 times superior to whey protein alone in terms of protein synthesis. But what we also see in terms of other ingredients within muscle are actions on the mitochondria. And so we know that creatine kinase has an effect on upregulating ATP production, and PeptiStrong works in a similar way to increase ATP production at the mitochondrial level. So PeptiStrong increases the energy available to increase that protein synthesis. We need both, because we can't just upregulate protein synthesis. We need substrate, so we still need leucine and arginine. We need to upregulate that, but we need energy at the cellular level in order to affect that action. And so that ATP upregulation allows us to do that. One of the things we'll also see here is a reduction in inflammation at the muscle level via IL-6, but also via myostatin suppression with PeptiStrong. And we'll move forward from that here. So PeptiStrong, the first AI-discovered new ingredient that actually has multiple mechanisms of action. It's a natural peptide. It comes from a fava bean, and there are 4 benefits in one 2.4 gram dose. And then we have clinical claims on strength, power, recovery, and energy. Strong patent protection and multiple formulations. Many of those formulations are here today in terms of gels, stick packs, chewable tablets, bars, and capsules. In terms of the clinical studies that we've done 3 clinical trials, both all randomized controls. The first trial was in men. It looked at immobilization of limbs. So we put them in plaster and then measured 2 weeks later muscle strength and muscle protein synthesis by a muscle biopsy. And we can see that there was an increase in protein synthesis 4 times greater in the strength and power claim. That's the 3rd bar chart on the right. So the FSR 4 times higher than whey protein in that group. What we also saw 2 weeks after immobilization was the PeptiStrong group recovered their leg strength to 103%, so just above baseline, whereas the whey protein group only managed around the mid 60% in terms of recovery. We saw some suppression in plasma CK, but we also maintained the same amount of muscle mass as the whey protein group. In terms of recovery, you see that there a little bit larger. So what I'm going to suggest to you is that strength and muscle are the optimum biohack right now. Longevity and grip strength can be correlated, and there are multiple ways of influencing that mTOR pathway, and PeptiStrong approaches it via that main pathway in terms of S6 phosphorylation. Sarcopenia, everybody ages past the age of 30. So once we get to 30, we start to develop fatty change within muscle, which we need to maintain. We need to keep what we have. Leucine is the leading BCAA with the best evidence, but keep what you have is a key in terms of longevity. PeptiStrong, a plant-based peptide network with 4 clinically proven claims in 1 ingredient. I'm going to stop there and ask any questions.
Is it important the age at which you start to take this peptide, these products? Is it better if you start younger? Is it most important if you are in a more senior age?
No, I think, look, peptides have an interesting history. So these are orally available plant-based peptides. It's very different from an injectable type sort of pharma route. So there is no there's no barrier from an age perspective. This is a GRAS certified product from the age of 2 upwards. We're about to start a trial in malnourishment in kids in Guatemala with PeptiStrong because of this 4 times protein synthesis rate, which is quite important for us to highlight. So no age restriction.
As a follow-up to that, you mentioned that you're starting a trial on kids, but the studies you've already done, what's the population?
Yeah, so study 1 was men 18 to 30, study 2, 30 to 45, study 3 just about to finish. It's running at the moment in men and women through 20 to 50.
So a couple questions. I'll try to put them in the same line, though. Is this product currently being sold in the U.S.? Is it direct to consumers, or are you here because you're doing more of a B2B play with the peptide?
Yeah, for sure. So we're B2B. It launched in GNC's whey product this year. It's in Cellucor with NutriBullet, and in Europe, it's launched in La Trochaine, French pharmacies. There's some significant launches straight to come. We don't do any D2C work, but it's for sale in the US and in Europe, and also in Japan.
Are the formats usually dietary supplements? Are there any other non-pill formats that you're doing?
Yeah, so we on our stand we've got capsules, we've got chewable tablets, gels, stick packs, and bars. We've extended into food, so we launched with Heineken supermarkets in November in a bar form and then a ready-to-drink shake. So it's formulated across all of those products, 2.4 gram dose, neutral, odorless, and blends well.
More questions? We have a little bit more time?
Yeah.
I guess it's a formulation type of question. You mentioned it's in a product with whey. Mm-hmm. Has there been any research with using it in conjunction with protein, since you still need that as as I guess a building material?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've done a fair bit of cell work looking at the synergistic effect with leucine. So leucine has a pretty poor effect on S6 upregulation, but a much better upregulation prior. So we've done lab work looking at that, and we've got a white paper on it. But we've not done any clinical plus or minus trials to look at that 4 times synthesis. The malnutrition NIH study will be the first one where we look at the reduction of volume, because the idea there is actually in malnourished kids, there's a difficulty in eating as well as actually absorbing. And so if we can reduce by 3/4 the amount of protein, of soy protein in that nourished food, we can do better from it. So that'll be the first time we've done a synergistic approach. Whereas most of the work to date has been on PeptiStrong as an additive, as a singular ingredient itself, for clarity in terms of the effects.
Other questions?
Is there any gut health side effects?
Not that we've had. So it's a lot of the work that we do with the AI platform beforehand is gut survivability rather than transit effects. But in the studies we've had, from a side effect perspective, not at all.
Any other questions?
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And we'll reconvene again in about an hour. So